according to the Central Bank of Egypt, remittances from Egyptians living abroad grew by 1.6% in the fiscal year 2021-2022, totaling $31.9 billion. Central Bank of Egypt explained that remittances increased by 3% from the April to June period for a total of about $8.3 billion from $8.1 billion in the prior period. Joining us to discuss these headlines, Kelvin Emmanuel, CEO Dairy Hills in our Abuja studio, and Gospel Obele is an economist and founder of Streetnomics Think Tank in London. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Gospel, let me start with you. How important are foreign remittances to developing nations at this time?
Hi, Remittances. Thank you for having me. Yes, it's very critical for the development of nations, particularly if foreign remittances are used strategically. But what we've seen is that looking at the size of close to $27 to $40 billion in foreign remittances gotten by Nigerians every year, those monies have gone into welfare economics, paying school fees, rents, and all of those issues. And those monies actually account for almost less than 5% technically of Nigerians abroad and all of that. But if you now look at it really holistically, how many Nigerians are really benefiting from foreign remittances sent back home? Because for you to benefit, that means you have some form of direct or indirect link with somebody living abroad, who is also a Nigerian sort of. So the conversation here is that as more Nigerians are leaving, there's also a potential that the foreign remittance net will be widened in terms of amount of what is being remitted back home. However, this can be much more strategized as a pool towards critical funding for entrepreneurs, critical funding for development, especially capital-related projects. Because right now, as it stands, Nigeria does not have any strategic pipeline funding for its entrepreneurial ecosystem. Neither does it have, some form of strategic linkage with its diaspora community, to fund some of its major capital projects, as it were. So foreign direct diaspora remittances can do a whole lot more than it's currently offering in terms of welfare economics, but a lot of more organization of that market, of that pipeline, of the institutional process, has to happen. And the central bank needs to take it a lot more seriously because so far it's one of the fast rising means of foreign exchange receipts by Nigerians. But however, it's been tilted more towards welfare economics due to the poor attention and focus given in that space. And it also gives the credence to the fact that a lot of leakages in that space as well. So a lot of the organization has to come in for foreign remittances to be used strategically for developmental and core entrepreneur funding reasons.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that, Gospel. Kelvin, let me come to you. 64% of that 31 billion that came into Egypt was from expats in the Gulf region. So my question to you, expats or exports? So what should developing nations be focused on? Maybe both, Kelvin.
Good morning, Rotus. Thank you so much for having me. For me, I do not believe that we should pick either one of them. I think the both of them are important, but it's very critical for the government not to build its foreign exchange supply strategy based on foreign remittances. And the reason is because the government really doesn't have a control over the amount of foreign remittances that comes into the country as a means to fund your FX settlements. The government needs to focus on FDIs, and the most critical decision the central bank needs to take in order to get companies to decide to bring in FDIs again into Nigeria is forward guidance on the exchange rate, converging the exchange rates. And that, in my opinion, they can only achieve by adopting a floating exchange rate mechanism. On the other hand, it's also important for the government to focus on backward integration that is going to raise its NXP proceeds, to focus on the secondary and tertiary layers of processing its primary commodities. I read a report a few days ago where the government of Nigeria was celebrating, I think 550 billion, if I'm not mistaken, around that range, as the earnings it got for exporting agricultural commodities. That, in my opinion, is extremely poor. That is over a little over $1 billion US. And when you have nations like the Netherlands celebrating $106 billion a year in agricultural commodities, processed commodities, it's very poor for Nigerian government celebrating $1 billion plus. So it needs to focus on the secondary and tertiary layers of its commodities through backward integration as a means to increase the quality of its exports and increase the revenue it gets from exports. It also needs to convert the rate so that the companies who are exporting will not divert those proceeds to other foreign accounts as a means to settle their profit repatriation, capital equipment imports, and raw material imports, in my opinion.
Thank you for that, Kelvin. Gospel, let me come back to you. This news coming out of Ghana. What's the danger with unlicensed loan providers in the financial ecosystem?
There are more fundamental root causal issues, and some form of causation around it as well. What that says is that, largely in Africa, we're very, 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 our lending culture, our credit culture hasn't really evolved, although there's some form of inequality around it. We've seen some form of growth in Kenya. However, due to the fact that we are not yet proactive in developing a healthy credit lending culture, it also means the regulatory processes and the processes of vetting lending institutions, especially in that sense of immunity fintechs, the process of vetting them hasn't also evolved to a mature stage where you can properly vet who has a license to operate at a particular period of time. So, it's very unhealthy because it means that consumers and the people are exposed to some form of unhealthy lending practices and risk associated as well. And a lot of consumers are also irrational, within the context of how they lend and where they lend or why they even lend in the first place. So the government has to do a lot around ensuring that it reduces the number of unlicensed platforms, that are providing lending solutions. To also speak to this fact is the fact that you have a lot of licensed lending institutions who are some form of, in quote, loan sharks, to consumers as well. All right. So it's not just for those who are unlicensed. Even those who are licensed are also arranging some form of unhealthy credit. So in the first place, you do not have a healthy credit structure or a credit lending system, but you're now leaving, your leakages are creating room for much more unhealthy practices that would hamper the future of lending development in that economy. So I think a lot more has to be done around the root causal reasons, which is around building a robust regulatory framework, as part of checks and balances to ensure that consumers are not at risk of loan sharks.
Thanks, Gospel. Kelvin, what do you make of the approach of the Bank of Ghana in this regard? Warning the public first, they then said they will now take action against those loan providers, unlicensed loan providers later.
It's interesting what the Bank of Ghana has come out with. I think it's the right decision. In fact, it's even in line with the fact that just a couple of days ago, I think the FCCPC bill that gives the FCCPC the right to operate, the legislation from National Assembly was signed into law by the President. And also a couple of days ago, the Director General of the FCCPC clamped down on several loan shark companies that are unlicensed and that have constituted a public nuisance really to the population, threatening people and are charging outrageous rates that are out of line of the regulation for financial service providers in Nigeria state given out by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So I think it's the right thing entirely. And in fact, what really impressed me about what the FCCPC did a few days ago is to ask all the service providers from the fintech companies to the banks to the telcos that provide support services for these loan sharks to disable them immediately. I think it's a step in the right direction. And immediately, the authorities from the FCCPC to CBN needs to release like a guideline, an operational framework for the ones who are sane enough to register and follow the rules and procedures for giving out loans to the public.
Great stuff. I want to switch to energy transition, and we of course know that Toyota Kenya has taken that 35% stake in a solar installation company. But let me bring in Vice President Osinbajo. I want to throw this question to the both of you. Only got a few minutes to go. So, Gospel, you first. What do you make of Vice President Osinbajo saying that we need about $10 billion for Nigeria's energy transition? What's your take on how that's going to work out?
Top of mind, I think it's a very good move, but fundamentally, I still think a lot of structural things has to be in place, all right? Even within the current construct of the energy consumption we have now, there is still a huge gap between energy supply and energy demand. All right, there's still a huge gap. There are still conversations around energy equality, clean energy, energy access, and all of these things. So the policies, the institutions, and the fundamentals to drive inclusion, and to drive availability for everyone is still a very big question. So you don't want to focus so much around how much you need for an energy transition. You want to focus more around what really needs to be done, all right? The money would always come, what really needs to be done to ensure that every Nigerian can benefit from it. However, once power is fixed, the value of the Nigerian currency will show up, over 50% in value in real context, because the largest consumers of PMS and all of these things are households and businesses, not necessarily car owners, not necessarily the third parties as people think about it. So this context is very critical: inclusion and ensuring that it's accessible and people can afford it.
Thanks, Gospel. Kelvin, same question to you. What do you make of this $10 billion package?
So, Reuters is very interesting because the electric vehicle to combustion engines adoption, for example, the ratio is between 5%, yeah? And some of the countries around the world have given like a timeline for which companies, automakers are mandated to switch from fuel combustion engines to EV cars. I saw the energy, like a press release on the energy transition plan the Vice President released. However, I'm not exactly optimistic. The reason is because I believe the Vice President is not focusing on what he should focus on. If you want to talk about solar panels, you need to talk about the raw materials for making solar panels in Nigeria, like silicon-based, like aluminium, which is gotten from petcoke. And by the way, petcoke is one of the derivatives. Petroleum coke is one of the derivatives for refining crude oil. He needs to talk about lithium, iron ore, and cobalt. Yeah, he needs to talk about creating like a mining framework for these companies to be able to get these basic raw materials. He needs to talk about steel. And so what is the plan for the government to privatize the steel plants it currently has existing in Nigeria and bring in private sector investors to provide steel for the companies? He needs to talk about power, because if, for example, Tesla comes and says, okay, you know what, we're going to set up like a battery gigafactory in Nigeria, we're going to bring in $5 billion, we're going to bring in Solar City to set up solar panel manufacturing plants. A few weeks ago, I think Sun Africa LLC had a meeting with the president in Nigeria in Abuja. What is the plan of the government, of the vice president, who has the National Economic Council, to see that the primary components these companies need to run are provided? How are they going to get their power? Are they going to get it from natural gas? For example, if Tesla is going to set up like a gigafactory in Kogi State, is he going to set it up and get natural gas from Ajaokuta, which is where the city gate for Kogi State is, in line with the AKK pipeline? Or is he going to set up a solar farm to get mini grid to supply its factory? If the vice president is not telling me about the details on how the supply chain infrastructure for these companies to be able to provide the equipment and transition Nigeria according to the plan, I don't know what he's talking about. The plan doesn't make any sense to me.
Well said, well said. And we hope that we're going to get more details from the presidency on exactly how that $10 billion transition will work. Just a minute to go. COP27 taking place in Egypt. Is that encouraging with respect to energy transition for the continent? Very quickly, 20 seconds for each of you. Gospel, you go first.
Yes, I think it is. Africa should not be excluded from the conversation. Climate change is happening, and it's happening for real. We've seen what climate change has done in Vietnam, in shortening global supply of soya beans and grains and other key commodities, that are currently leading to the inflation dynamics we see today. So it's a major conversation, and I think Africa leading the conversation this time around shows a lot of good step in the right direction, at least the first step. However, whatever happens after the conference in terms of follow-up, engagement, including other African states, driving policies and actually executing those policies for the common good of all, is the very big question we need to ask to really know if at the end of the day was a step in the right direction.
Kelvin, we're out of time. You have to make your answer very short. Kelvin, go ahead. Thanks, Gospel.
I am not, I don't think Russia and Ukraine has shown the world that we're not ready to put up with the bold reductions that COP26, COP22, and COP27 is going to propose. I believe Nigeria needs to take advantage of petroleum, oil, and gas for its industrialization by doing backward integration, supply its needs, then export to other African countries and other parts of the world. Nigeria also needs to focus on the Nigerian-Moroccan gas pipeline and the Trans-Sahara pipeline as a means to increase its revenue to GDP ratio, while it also focuses on the transitional energy plan that the VP launched yesterday, tapping into solar energy and EV batteries as a means to, meet up with its climate action goals. But for me, I believe that this is the time for Africa to industrialize, and Africa needs to realize that it's unfair for for Europe and America to tell it to make those bold reductions when it has not fully participated in the benefits of the petroleum economy.
Kelvin Emmanuel, CEO, Dairy Hills, Gospel Obele, Economist, founder of Streetnomics Think Tank. Thank you both for a very great discussion today. Really appreciate your time.